I call David Clark.
Well, Mr Speaker, Labor will support this bill through the House, and it's largely because it's a benign bill. It does have an intention, I think, to try to get some more people into homes, and it may be that the additional flexibility will help one or two people get into homes. But it does very little actually to address the core issue in this area, which is about supply. This government has no answer to the supply side problem of housing in New Zealand, and the statistics back that up. We have, the member opposite says rubbish, but we have the lowest home ownership rate in New Zealand in 60 years. That member should know, because it's in his part of the country, that there is this enormous housing price inflation. Housing in his area is going up faster than the amount that a house goes up each week in Auckland is more than many people earn in a week. So only those who are in the housing market are able to afford a house in Auckland. In many cases, a house will go up $1,000 a week in value. And how would many New Zealanders, how much would those New Zealanders who can't afford to get into a house enjoy having $1,000 more in their pockets per week? Then they might be able to afford to actually get into a home. So what we see here is a weak attempt to try to do something about the housing issue, brought about, of course, by an election campaign that exposed National's lack of policy. They scurried around, they tried to put something together, and we know that they wouldn't have adopted this policy if they weren't on the back foot. The Treasury said it was a hopeless policy. The Treasury thought this policy would not have the intended effect. And what it highlights, I guess, is, and what we saw in the campaign where it came out, was that Labor is the party of first home buyers. The Kiwi Build policy that Labor put up in the election that would have seen 100,000 more Kiwis put into homes through houses that would have been built by the private sector but funded through the cheaper government borrowing, would have seen New Zealanders actually able to afford homes, so that ordinary Kiwi families could have had that dream of owning their own home realised in a way that is currently impossible under this government, which spirals from one housing crisis to the next. And what we see here is National, the party of speculators, doing a little bit to make it look like they're doing something, but not really addressing the core issues in the housing sector. So, Mr Speaker, we know the average house in Auckland last year earned more than the average worker, a rise of just under $90,000 for the past year. And I look forward to hearing what Jamie Lee Ross, the member over there who said rubbish, might have to say about this, because I'm not sure how he can justify those kinds of rises and say that the government has a policy to tackle that housing problem in Auckland. We've heard in question time, of course, of people living in garages and in cars, and we hear a lot of bluff and bluster from the government, but no real solution to the housing problem. And of course, the implication of not dealing with it goes right around the country. In my electorate, the effect of the Reserve Bank's measures, because it had no other tools to actually help deal with its issues, the LVRs saw a significant drop in first home buyer rates, and that has been mirrored around the regions, which are feeling neglected by this national government. And I've no doubt that the result will be exactly the same in Northland. Up there we have, of course, the government trying to build bridges furiously as it tries to persuade local voters that it hasn't forgotten about them in the regions, despite the houses they can't afford, despite housing that is cold and damp in many cases, and despite high levels of unemployment in that area. And yet we see here a bill that in many ways actually is like pouring petrol on a fire. This is what it's doing. It's through giving Homestart subsidies, we're giving more people a little bit more money in their hand, and the house prices will go up more. So I'm afraid that this bill has little to recommend it, but we will be supporting it. The extra amount people can withdraw at most will be a couple of $1,000s, and it's unlikely to make any significant difference in their ability to buy a home, particularly if those houses keep going up and up and up. And at the same time, they're effectively robbing themselves of their retirement savings in order to take that money out. As I say, for one or two people it might make sense, but overall it does nothing at all to address the major housing crisis in New Zealand that is affecting so many families. And it's another illustration of the way in which this government have lost touch. After 3 years, they don't seem to have answers anymore. They had New Zealand behind them, there's no doubt at the start. The Prime Minister was very popular, but as time has gone on, those ideas are no longer there. And I suggest that Simon Bridges and this government actually should take a lesson out of their own book. We heard him say they should quit while they're behind during question time, and it occurred to me that for once he should use his mirror to good effect and take his own advice. Because Alice in Wonderland. Because this government is really run out of ideas. It's clear when we see policies like this that won't solve the housing crisis, that really tinker and make it appear like they might be trying to do something but don't get to the nub of the issue, that this is their big idea is really a tragedy for this Parliament. There are some technical amendments that went through at the committee stage that will ensure that membership in a complying superannuation fund for 3 years may count towards qualifying for a first home withdrawal, that will ensure that a first home withdrawal can be used only for New Zealand homes. These are kind of sensible things that have been agreed. And the changes, of course, to the veterans' support payments are largely technical. Now, it's good that we've sorted these things out as they've gone through the House. There's a bunch of other ones in terms of Māori land around first home withdrawal being used to make payments, including deposit agreements before the agreement for sale and purchase is unconditional, making sure the rules are right around that, ensuring that existing interest in Māori land doesn't preclude access to a first home withdrawal, and so on. These are sensible matters. If you're going to put this bill through, they should be got right. But as I said at the outset, this bill does not address the fundamental supply side problem. This government is watching while Rome burns. It is watching the housing crisis spiral out of control. Its latest answer, of course, is to flog off state houses to more property speculators, which will do absolutely nothing to help. That was dressed up with the fig leaf of support from the Salvation Army, and that fig leaf, I'm afraid, has been removed, and there's something particularly ugly to show in its place. And the government, of course, is now squirming. And we heard Bill English in the House today trying to defend that policy, trying to defend the indefensible. This government will continue, of course, to say it has one or two new ideas, but those ideas have not the currency to persuade the commentariat, and they are not persuading New Zealanders anymore, because New Zealanders know from day to day when they cannot afford a house, when in fact they can less afford a house today than they could a couple of years ago, that things are not working. So, Mr Speaker, in supporting the bill, we note that the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has said it is a tentatively positive bill. That was the warmest praise it's got, obviously, with the Treasury's criticism, the tentatively positive step put on it. And we must wonder why we are here in Parliament spending a couple of millions of dollars worth of taxpayers' money to get this bill through, I suspect, in terms of the salaries of the people here, the staff supporting this legislation going through the House to pass a tentatively positive bill, when in fact there are far greater solutions begging. And of course the one I've mentioned earlier is Labour's Kiwi Build policy, which would see 100,000 New Zealanders helped into their first home, ensure that there are warm, dry housing for the next generation of children, to ensure that our country can invest in the next generation, making sure that we have people living healthily with warm houses over their heads, not in garages or cars as we're seeing now. Mr Speaker, we will support this bill. It's a shame that this is the best the government now has to offer. They're a tired government who are looking to push one or two ideas through the House. I'm looking forward to seeing how Mr Bennett justifies it when he rises to his feet in a minute. He must be embarrassed. He'll know in Hamilton they've got housing problems there too.
I call David Bennett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.